Hello, everyone. I'm going to take you through the elements of fiction so that we can discuss them within a story. First off, here are some of the beginning elements of fiction. We have characters, conflict, dialogue, genre, and imagery. Characters are the actors of the story. This is who the story is about. Examples of characters are Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, the people who are in the story. Doesn't have to be the main character either. Sometimes there are side characters, mentor characters who are designed to, help the main character along, and of course the antagonist or the villain. Then we have the conflict, the problem that the main character has to face during the story. This one can be a little tricky to find if it's not very cut and dry. For example, in Harry Potter, Harry has to fight Voldemort. That is the conflict. If your story isn't as simple as that, the conflict can be harder to find. So ask these questions. What does the main character want and what is in their way? That thing that's in their way, that's the source of the conflict. Dialogue. Spoken exchanges between characters in a dramatic or literary work, usually between two or more speakers. Put in simple terms, a dialogue is a conversation, usually between two or more characters. And then we have genre. This is a kind of literature. For instance, comedy, mystery, tragedy, romance, epic. These are all genres. And then we have imagery. These are vivid descriptions that authors use in their writing. This is when you can really see or feel what's happening in the story because of how well the author uses their words. Next up, we have plot, point of view, first person, third person, and resolution. The plot is the sequence of events that occurs through a work to produce a coherent narrative or story. Coherent means it makes sense from beginning, middle to end. The point of view is the perspective that a story is told from, which brings us from first person and third person. Point of view or perspective, remember, think about it like a camera. Who's holding the camera? If the main character is holding the camera, that's first person. When a character is telling the story about themselves, you'll see pronouns like I, me, we, us when speaking about what's happening in the story, especially during the narration. And then third person is when someone else is holding the camera. That's when a narrator tells the story about the characters. You'll see pronouns like he, she, and they to describe all of the actions instead of just a few. There are two different kinds of third person as well. There's third person omniscient and third person limited, which we'll get into later on when we cover point of view in more depth. Then, of course, we have resolution, the way the conflict is or is not resolved at the end of the story. For example, in a movie like Avengers Endgame, there is a resolution to that. The problem is solved. In Infinity War, the end of that movie shows the Avengers losing the fight. So the conflict for them is not necessarily solved, but the conflict is ended at the end of the story. So it's important to remember that sometimes a resolution doesn't mean that the character gets what they want. Sometimes they don't. Here are some more elements. We have realistic fiction. That's a story where the setting and the situation could truly happen. For example, if your story is set in a middle school, that's realistic fiction. If no one's doing magic or if no one's going off on a grand adventure and they generally stay within the realistic realm, that is realistic fiction. Setting is where and when the story takes place. Symbol is an object or element in a story that stands for a bigger concept or idea. And the theme is the big idea of the story. We've talked about theme before. And then going in, I will take your questions, and then it's your turn. Then it's time for you to look for these elements in a story we're about to read. Can't wait to see what you do.